If you are of Western origin and you self-identify as a Christian or have been a Christian for any amount of time and you've attended Sunday services with any regularity, then you've probably spent most of your time in the New Testament, with even more time spent in the Gospels, which is a good thing because it is the good news. But if you spend most, if not all, of your time in the New Testament, you're only getting half of the picture. You're not seeing things in focus. And today, I'm going to hopefully bring into focus those first few words of the Bible that were made clear or brought into focus much later, similar to the image appearing on the wall before you now. So, hang with me a few moments for a step-by-step comparison of Genesis and the Gospel of John. Now, the Gospel of John should be pretty familiar to you, but if not, let me quickly bring you up to speed. John is one of 4 gospel writers of the New Testament who gives an account of the life and ministry of Jesus. So, that's where we're going to start our comparison in verse 1 of John. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him nothing was made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. This should sound eerily familiar, especially when you realize what he was referencing. John, or what his friends would have called him, Yochanan, was Jewish, and therefore would have referenced the Jewish scriptures, also known as the Old Testament, since the New Testament hadn't even been written yet, because it was being written. So Yochanan, a Jew, raised in a Jewish home, in a Jewish country, who is now writing about the Jewish Messiah talked about in their scriptures, needs a point of reference, so that his Jewish audience will get the connection. And where do you think he turns? In the beginning, what you and I call the book of Genesis. And you can see the similarities between what John just wrote to what Moses wrote more than 1,000 years earlier, beginning in verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void. Darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And then God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. Drop down to verse 14, the 4th day of creation, where God said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of the heavens to divide the day from the night for signs, seasons, days, and years." Did you notice how the light in verse 1 is different from the lights in verse 14? We know what the light in verse 14 are. They're the sun, moon, stars. However, Yochanan, knew that the light in verse 1 was Jesus. You're about to see that John didn't write anything new. He simply revealed or brought to light, brought into focus that which was already written. Moses tells us that before anything was, there was God. And then we see John comparing God to his word, that they are one and the same. God is his word. The word is God. Moses goes on to tell us that the Spirit of God hovered, where John tells us that he was with God. But we don't know who this he is that John has just introduced us to. Next, Moses tells us that God spoke and there was light, where John tells us that all things came to be through him, and we still don't know who this he is until we drop down a few verses. But before we do, what do we know so far? We know that in the beginning was God and his word. We know that he spoke and there was light, but that isn't just any light that we can see, because we know that those weren't created until the 4th day. So what or who is this light that was with God in the beginning? John tells us in verse 14, when he writes that the Word, the same Word that was with God in the beginning, the same Word that all things came to be through, became flesh, a human being. and lived with us. And who was this human being that literally walked this planet? You and I call him Jesus. Those who knew him, walked with him, called him Yeshua, the Word of God put on flesh and became Yeshua, Jesus, a human being. Now, I can't explain how any of that makes sense and what makes him God. And if I could explain it, then he wouldn't be worth worshiping. I hope that you are blessed by this and search the scriptures for yourself. Until next time, may God richly bless you and keep you.